In this video, I'll show you how I made the deck corpse of Krieg Pug. I'll walk you through a step-by-step guide on how I made the base, and I'll show the paints that I used along the way. The first thing we're going to need is skulls. There's two types of skulls that we're going to need from this kit. The skulls that we're going to take from this kit are the full and half skulls. Roughly you'll need about 16 full skulls and 28 half skulls. Then we're going to grab a 32mm base and some coffee stirrers. I have a bit of a stockpile of these because every time I go out for coffee I grab a few before I leave. But what we're going to do is we're going to stick them down to the base, cut off the edges, and then build them up like planks. I like to glue one plank on its own first, then I'll start to add more as I go. This just helps to keep everything straight. After I get everything in place, I go around the edges and start clipping off as much of the excess as I can. It doesn't need to be perfect, we're just trying to get as close to the base without damaging it. Once I was happy enough with the amount that I've taken off, I grab 240 grit sandpaper and I go around all the edges, trying to make it as smooth as possible. It's going to look worse than it is, but once we have paint on it you won't even know the difference. Now you can skip this step, but I like to do this to all my planks. I carve deeper recesses into it to give it a more gritty look. I could have skipped this step because the skulls are going to cover up the majority of the base anyway, but the next thing I do is grab Agrax Earthshade and I put this over to the entirety of the base. Let that seep into all the deeper recesses. I like to give the base 2 or 3 coats just to make sure that it covers everything. Next we'll grab our full skulls. We'll put one down as a guideline first, making sure to stay on the edge of the base, going around in a full circle. The last skull I had to trim down slightly just to make sure everything fit. Once everything is glued in place, we'll grab some milliput and we'll put this into the center of the base, just so the next layer of skulls have some support underneath. Next I'll just grab some black primer. I use this to paint the milliput just because I don't like how it looks when the milliput is in between the cracks of the skulls. The yellow is very obvious when you have blood effects on top. Next we're going to do the same thing as we did before, just now we're going to use the skulls without the jaw. We'll push them further in to give a more of a triangle shape as the skulls go up. Then we repeat the process. We'll put some more milliput up on top, we'll paint it with black primer, and then we'll go back in with another layer of skulls, slowly building up to the very top. Once we have the third layer of skulls on, we'll put some glue into the middle and we'll put in 3 or 4 skulls just to fill up that gap. Then we'll move on to the painting process. I like to go in with the primer and the brush just so we don't cover up any of the previous work that we've done. When it comes to painting skulls, I like to use a dry brush. I'll use an XV88 as a base, making sure to leave enough of the black into the recesses so it'll give a nice heavy contrast. I'll do maybe 1 to 2 coats of this until I get full coverage. Next I'll grab some Ushanti bone and I'll do the same thing, except I'll do a lighter dry brush, trying to leave some of the XV88 in the lower recesses, trying to catch as much of the raised edges as I can. Then we get into my favourite part where we start using blood effects. I'll grab an old brush that I don't really care about anymore, and I'll start generously applying the blood for the blood god effects all over the base. When it comes to corn, there is no such thing as less is more, so feel free to apply as much as you want. There is no way you can go overboard in this step. At this stage I like to go in and paint the rim of the base just so we have everything nice and clean. I'll grab a satin varnish just so we don't lose any of the progress that we have, so no paint chips away, and I like to give this maybe 1 to 2 coats. For the stringy gore around the base I use Yoo-hoo glue. I'll mix this with blood for the blood god and I always do a 3:1 ratio. This way the gore effect isn't too droopy and it's not too coagulated, so it's easy to work with. You'll see the texture that I'm after as I mix it together. But once you have the consistency that you want, then you start to apply it all over the base. There's no real aim to where I'm placing it, I'm just placing it and dragging it across as much of the model to get that stringy effect. It doesn't matter too much as I'll go back in and fine tune it as we go. We just want the Yoo-hoo glue to be stretched out to give it that kind of effect. This is where I go back in with a toothpick and I start to push it into the recesses. This will help give it an effect looking like that there's more gore underneath the skulls than there actually is. I also like to aim for the skulls, pushing the Yoo-hoo glue into the eye sockets and in and around the mouth to give it a more flayed flesh look. And after that then I'll go back in with more Yoo-hoo glue just around certain areas that I kind of touched up too much, just so I can bring it back to what it was. Finally I'll go back in with some more blood for the blood god and I'll just touch up the Yoo-hoo glue to give it a more coagulated look. Then I'll go in with a gloss varnish. This will help the blood look more real, it'll help it look like it has just been spilled. But we don't want the rim of the base to be shiny as well, so I use a matte varnish and a airbrush medium at a 3:1 ratio. I'll spread this across the rim of the base just to dull that down. I'll always dry fit the model before gluing just to see where the best position is. When it comes to painting the pug, I start off with a black primer. I'll go in then with a Thunderhawk blue as a base coat. Make sure to thin your paints and do 2 to 3 coats just to get even coverage. When it comes to the gas mask, fur and sleeping bag on the back, I use the same paints. I start off with a Xandri dust, same again giving it an even base coat. This will take a few more layers because the Xandri dust is less opaque over black. For all the leather on the model, I use Rhinox hide starting off. This will cover all the pouches, the leather straps. And don't worry about being too neat. You can always come back in and clean up any mistakes that you've made. My new go-to silver is Heavy Metal by Warpaints. It's from the John Blanche Grimdark set, and I think it's perfect for using it as a base coat when you want a more gritty look. I apply 2 coats over all the metallics, the helmet, gas mask, shovel, and I also paint the lenses for a later step. When it comes to the Krieg, I always use ironclad grey. I use this for the hood underneath the masks. And with the shovel I wanted a different brown, so I went with a dry bark. After a bit of cleanup, we're ready for the washes. For the metallics I'll use none oil, but for everything else I'll just apply Agrax Earthshade. I'll only use 1 coat on each step, but I make sure to not let it pool in any places that I don't want it. I just want it to build up into the recesses. If it starts to pool up too much, I'll wick off my brush onto a damp paper cloth and I'll go back in and wick it away, just so it doesn't leave any stains when we're going back in. Once everything is dry, I go back in with our original base coats, trying to build back up the layers, bring back the life into the model while leaving the washes into the recesses. This way it'll help us give us a nice contrast as we're going through. But when it comes to the leather, I skip the original base coat and go straight into Morfang Brown, doing the same thing, leaving the washes into the recesses. For the highlights I use Skag Brown. We don't want to cover up too much of the last step, we want to leave some of that Morfang Brown showing. For the jacket I'll use Fenrisian Grey. Now the jacket doesn't have any raised edges, so I actually have to draw on the lines. I just imagine where the highlights would be and follow that. For the bedroll and gas mask I'll use Ushanti Bone, and again I'll follow the natural highlights while also applying them where I think they'll be best suited. For the gas mask it's much easier to follow the design shape, but we really want to leave that wash into the recesses. At this point I realised I didn't paint the Aquila, so I went in with an Emperor's Gold, and I was happy enough with how it looked. For the silver highlights I used a 3:1 ratio of Heavy Metal and Chrome Model Air Silver. Now the chrome is really powerful, so you don't need that much in it, but it really packs a punch. I'll also put a tiny bit right in the centre of the lens for the next step that we're going to do. For the lenses I use Blood Angel's Red Contrast, and since we have the chrome in the centre and the heavy metal on the outside, it'll give a nice glowing effect. Then it's just a matter of a little cleanup. When it comes to varnishing my models, I like to use a 3:2 ratio of satin and matte varnish. This helps the model keep a bit of life without being too shiny. Then all we have to do is glue this little psychopath to his mountain of trophies. But we all know you can't do the Emperor's Will without getting your paws dirty, so we have to put a bit of blood on him. And now your Pug of War is ready to take on the Emperor's enemies. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you for sticking around. I plan to make more videos on my current projects, so if that's something that might interest you, remember to hit the subscribe button. And if you have any suggestions on what I should make next, feel free to drop a comment down below. I hope I inspired some of you to take on your Sea of Grey, and I'll see you in the next video.